This happened in the western United States, in Colorado, high in the mountains during a solo hiking trip I had planned to be quiet and uneventful. I had been walking alone for most of the day, following a trail that climbed steadily through dense forest before opening up into higher, rockier terrain, and by late afternoon, the air had grown thinner and colder, the kind of cold that doesn't bite immediately, but settles into your bones without asking. I enjoy that feeling, the isolation, the sense that you're far enough from everything to hear your own thoughts clearly. I had seen signs warning about wildlife earlier in the day, but nothing unusual for that region, and I wasn't worried. I've encountered animals before while hiking. You learn to respect distance, read the environment, trust your instincts. That afternoon, my instincts began whispering long before I understood why. It started with the silence. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a gradual absence of sound, as if the mountain had decided to hold its breath. No birds, no wind moving through the trees. Even my own footsteps felt muted, strangely absorbed by the ground beneath me. I slowed down without realizing it, my body reacting before my mind caught up. That's when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being followed. Not rushed, not hunted, observed. I stopped walking. The feeling didn't disappear. I listened carefully, scanning the tree line, the rocks, the uneven slopes above and below the trail, expecting to catch movement, a shadow, something that would give my fear a shape. There was nothing. I told myself it was a mountain lion or a bear. That kind of awareness makes sense in places like that. Your brain fills the gaps with what it knows. Still, something about the presence felt wrong. Animals don't linger like that. They don't hover just outside perception. I continued walking, my senses stretched thin, every muscle alert, every sound magnified by the quiet. After a while, I noticed something else. Whatever was following me wasn't staying behind me. The feeling shifted. Sometimes it felt to my right, higher up the slope, where the rocks were loose and difficult to navigate. Other times it seemed closer, almost parallel, moving at my pace without effort. I never heard footsteps, no cracking branches, no sliding stones, just the constant pressure of attention. At one point I stopped again and slowly turned in a full circle, letting my eyes adjust, forcing myself to really look, not just glance. That's when I smelled it. Not rot, not blood, something sharp and unfamiliar, like damp fur mixed with cold earth, carried briefly on the air before disappearing again. My heart began to pound, not with panic yet, but with a growing realization that whatever this was, it wasn't behaving the way it should. I considered turning back, but the trail behind me felt heavier somehow, as if the presence had subtly repositioned itself, no longer curious, but waiting. I decided to keep going. The trail eventually narrowed, climbing higher, the trees thinning out, replaced by rock and low vegetation, and with every step the feeling intensified, not louder, not more aggressive, just closer, more focused. I could feel it now, distinctly, like standing near someone who isn't touching you, but is close enough that your skin reacts anyway. My breathing grew shallow. I started imagining shapes in my peripheral vision, movements that vanished the moment I tried to focus on them, and I hated myself for letting my imagination take control, even though my body seemed convinced that what I couldn't see mattered more than what I could. Then I heard it. Not a growl, not a roar, a sound I can only describe as a low, rhythmic exhale, deep and measured, as if something large was breathing slowly, deliberately, somewhere just beyond the rocks. I froze. The sound didn't repeat, but the silence that followed felt charged, heavy, like a held decision. I whispered out loud without thinking, a simple, "Hey," my voice thin and fragile in the open air. Nothing answered. I stood there for a long moment, fighting the urge to run, knowing that panic would only make things worse, knowing also that I was very far from help. Eventually the pressure eased. Not vanished. Eased. Like something losing interest, or choosing patience instead. I didn't wait to understand which. I walked back down the trail slowly, deliberately, refusing to turn my back too quickly. Every step measured, my awareness stretched painfully thin until the forest finally swallowed me again, and the familiar sounds of wind and distant birds returned as if nothing had ever been wrong. I didn't camp that night. I drove down the mountain in silence, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Days later, I mentioned the experience to a local ranger, careful not to exaggerate, framing it as a possible animal encounter. He listened quietly, nodding along, then said something that has stayed with me ever since. "Most animals don't follow people that way," he said. "If they're curious, you know. If they're hunting, you definitely know." I asked him what he thought it might have been. He paused for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes," he said, "people feel things out there that don't have a name." I didn't ask him to explain. Even now, when I hike alone in the mountains, I pay attention to the silence as much as the sounds, to the moments when the land feels attentive rather than empty. Because whatever was walking with me that day didn't need to show itself. It already knew I was aware. This happened in the United States, in Pennsylvania, during a winter when I was living alone in a small house just outside a quiet town. It wasn't an old farmhouse or anything remote, just a normal place, on a normal street. The kind of house you stop noticing once it becomes routine. I had been there for a few months already, long enough for the sounds, the layout, and the rhythm of the place to feel familiar, long enough to believe I understood it. Nothing isolated, nothing unusual. A normal neighborhood, normal streets, normal routines. That was part of the problem. I had lived there for almost 3 months without incident, long enough to stop paying attention to the sounds houses naturally make. The pipes, the heating, the subtle shifts in wood when temperatures drop at night. I worked from home, rarely had visitors, and most evenings passed quietly. Too quietly, looking back. The first thing I noticed wasn't fear, it was inconvenience. I'd wake up in the morning and find small things out of place. A chair slightly angled when I was certain I'd pushed it under the table. A door not fully closed. Lights switched off that I remembered leaving on. I blame myself immediately. Routine dulls memory. Fatigue fills in gaps with confidence. One night, after finishing work late, I sat in the living room with the TV off, scrolling on my phone, listening to the house settle. Around 1:40 a.m., I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Not footsteps, more like pressure, as if weight had briefly shifted against the floor and then lifted again. I paused, holding my breath, listening harder. Nothing followed. I checked the hallway, the bathroom, the spare room. Everything looked the same. Doors locked, windows shut. I told myself the sound came from the heating system cycling and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The bathroom mirror was fogged. Not fully, just a faint patch in the center, like someone had leaned close to it and breathed once. The bathroom was cold. The shower hadn't been used, and I was alone. I wiped the mirror clean and stood there longer than I needed to, staring at my own reflection, feeling ridiculous for letting it bother me. That night, I slept with the bedroom door open. A few days later, I started hearing the sounds again, always late, always subtle, the soft shift of weight, a floorboard reacting to pressure, the faintest creak, never repeating twice in the same spot. I tried staying awake one night, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lights off, just listening. Nothing happened. The sounds only came when I wasn't trying to hear them. The real change happened the night I woke up because the house felt wrong. Not loud, not quiet, just different. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it had settled lower in the room. I lay still, eyes open, listening. The heating was off. No wind outside, no traffic. Then I heard it. Not in the hallway, inside the room. It wasn't close enough to feel threatening. Not yet. It sounded like someone adjusting their footing, careful not to make noise, unfamiliar with the floor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the dark outline of the doorway, waiting for something to pass in front of it. Nothing did. After what felt like minutes, the pressure lifted. The room felt normal again. Lighter. I slept eventually, convincing myself it had been a dream layered over exhaustion. Next morning, I found the bedroom door closed. I always left it open. That was the first time I checked every lock twice before leaving the house. The final night came sooner than I expected. I woke up to the sound of something dragging lightly across the floor, slow, controlled, coming from the living room. This time I didn't tell myself it was nothing. I stayed in bed, listening as the sound stopped, then resumed, then stopped again, as if whoever was making it was learning where the floor reacted and where it didn't. My phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up without unlocking it, just to see the time. 2:17 a.m. That's when I heard a soft exhale. Not near me, not far either, just close enough to belong to the room. I didn't look. I didn't move. I waited until the sound faded, until the house felt empty again, and I left at dawn. Packed what I could carry and drove to a friend's place without explaining why. I never slept in that house again. Weeks later, when I went back during the day to collect the rest of my things, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The layout of the furniture had changed. Not drastically, just optimized. Paths cleared between rooms, corners opened, obstacles removed. As if someone had been practicing moving through the space, learning how I lived. I handed the keys back that afternoon and never asked questions I wasn't prepared to hear the answers to. Because I learned something important during that winter. Some houses don't just hold people. Sometimes they adapt to them. And sometimes they do it a little too well. This happened in France during the winter in a place I thought I knew well enough not to expect anything strange from it. I was walking near the forest of Fontainebleau, not far from the chateau itself, along one of those wide paths originally made for horses and carriages, long before anyone thought of hiking boots or weekend strolls. The ground was firm under my feet, frozen in places, and the trees stood bare and rigid on both sides, their branches cutting into the pale sky like dark veins. It was cold, but not aggressively so, the kind of cold that doesn't hurt right away, that settles slowly into your muscles and joints until you realize too late that it has been draining you without asking permission. I remember thinking that I felt more tired than I should have, considering how little distance I had actually covered. With each step, my legs felt heavier. At first, I assumed it was nothing more than the season, the lack of light, the dull fatigue that winter brings with it. But then I noticed something else, something harder to explain. A faint sensation beneath my feet, subtle enough that I almost ignored it. The ground didn't shake exactly. It felt more like a slow, irregular pulse, as if the earth itself were breathing unevenly. The sensation grew stronger as I kept walking. Not violent, just persistent. With it came an odd loss of energy, sudden and disproportionate, as if something were being pulled out of me rather than me simply getting tired. My chest felt light, almost hollow, and my thoughts slowed, stretching out in a way that made it harder to focus on where I was or why I was there. Then, without warning, I was no longer fully inside my body. There was no dramatic break, no moment I could clearly point to and say, "This is when it happened." 1 second, I was walking, aware of my boots against the gravel, the cold air in my lungs, and the next I was above myself, suspended a few meters up, watching my own body continue forward along the path. What disturbed me most was that I hadn't left myself entirely. I could still feel my body walking, the rhythm of my steps, the tension in my shoulders. At the same time, I was outside of it, observing from above, aware of both positions at once. There was no panic, just confusion, stretched thin by the impossibility of holding two perspectives without one cancelling the other out. The pulsing beneath the ground intensified. The tremors came faster now, closer together, vibrating through the path and into whatever part of me was still connected to the physical world. From above, I saw my body slow slightly, as if it were reacting to something it didn't understand. That was when I sensed it coming. Not from the front, from behind. A sudden pressure built in the air, dense and fast-moving, like something large forcing its way through a space it no longer fully belonged to. I had just enough time to register the sensation before everything collapsed inward. I was violently pulled back into my body. The impact felt physical, sharp and disorienting, like being dropped into myself from a great height. At the exact same moment, something passed straight through me. Not around me, through me. A stagecoach pulled by horses. I saw it only in fragments, motion and shape rather than detail, but I knew instantly what it was. The weight of it was undeniable, even as it refused to behave like anything solid. The horses, the wheels, the body of the stagecoach itself moved through my chest and stomach as if I weren't fully there. The shock left me gasping. Pain flared briefly, not sharp enough to localize, more like the ache that follows a sudden collision you weren't prepared for. But beneath it was something colder, more unsettling. A feeling of emptiness, as if I had been hollowed out, made transparent in a way that had nothing to do with light. I stood there frozen on the path while the stagecoach continued forward for only a few more meters before losing its shape, thinning into the air and disappearing completely between the trees ahead. No sound followed it. No hoofbeats. No wheels. Just the forest. Silent and unchanged. For a moment, I felt invisible. Not unseen, but insubstantial. Like I had briefly failed to register fully in the world I was standing in. The path was the same. The chateau still loomed somewhere behind the trees. Nothing around me acknowledged what had just happened. As the sensation slowly faded, questions surfaced on their own, unwanted but persistent. Had I been the man walking this path once, long ago, struck down by that stagecoach? Or had I been inside it, seated behind those horses, responsible for a death I no longer remembered? Was it a memory that didn't belong to this life at all, catching up to me in a place where time had worn thin from being crossed too many times? I don't know. What I do know is that I left that path shortly after, my steps unsteady, my body feeling oddly misaligned, as if it hadn't fully forgiven me for leaving it behind, even briefly. And ever since then, when I walk near old roads or wide paths once meant for horses, I pay attention to the ground beneath my feet. Because sometimes it doesn't just carry you forward. Sometimes it remembers.